What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, November 29th. One more day left of this month here. We've got so much to talk about today. There's a lot of stuff that's really happening. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in the control room ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and observations. This story just started breaking just before airtime. Apparently, there has been a battle over Syria, where apparently Israel tried to attack some Iranian positions near Damascus, a town called Kiswa. And the reports are, of course, all over the place because they're just coming in. Originally, Syria was saying they shot down an enemy target. Now things are beginning to clear up. And apparently, Syria's air defenses knocked down 4 missiles before they could reach their target. And apparently, they shot down an Israeli warplane. We're still not aware of what kind of warplane it was. If it was actually an F-35, that's going to be really bad news for the plane's manufacturers. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this story all during the day here, but it's really ramping up. The whole world just seems ready to just start killing each other. And of course, over in the Kerch Strait, tensions are ramping up over there. And these 2 gunboats and tugboats basically crossed the Russian maritime border. That's what's really going on here. And the Russian patrol craft basically contacted them and said, we'd like you to stop because you didn't apply for permission to be using this waterway. And of course, the corporate media here in the West is all about, oh no, Russia just stole the ships. Bad Russia, bad Russia. And again, it was a very obvious provocation by Ukraine here. Now, Poroshenko is asking Germany and NATO to send ships to the Sea of Azov and basically start patrolling it. We've got to take that sea away from Russia. And the Ukrainian envoy, their ambassador to Germany, is calling for more sanctions on Russia as punishment for Sunday's incident. Now, again, Russia was just defending their territorial waters. They're not the bad guys here. But the Ukrainian envoy was out there saying that it's time for the West to put Putin in his place. Everything is at stake. That is very close to war talk. I'm sorry. Now, Kiev's claims that Ukrainian ships traveling to and from the country's ports in the Sea of Azov are being prevented from passing through the Kerch Strait are not true. A Crimean Maritime Authority source interviewed on TASS said basically nobody is blocking any ships. Traffic depends on actual weather conditions. Sometimes it's just a little too rough and people have to sort of pull over and tie up at a dock. There's also, of course, there is an official procedure. All ships must apply for passage through the Kerch Strait 48 hours in advance and then confirm the application 24 hours in advance. These gunboats and tugboats didn't do that. So it's just getting intense over there. Russia is installing the 4th S-400 anti-aircraft missile division in Crimea. They're not saying exactly where they're going to put it, but I'm going to imagine it's going to be someplace close to the border with Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine is starting to detain fighting-age men at the Donbass checkpoint. They're calling it a crackdown. Maybe, maybe not. Could be a draft. Remember, Ukraine is dealing with a major desertion crisis with their regular military. So Ukraine is detaining all men of military age, which by their definition includes men up to 50 years old, and they claim it's to clarify the data on military records and get the registration data. But it could be the beginnings of forced conscription here. Now, as you know, this weekend is the G20. Everybody's either down there or on their way there. In fact, there was just a story that apparently Angela Merkel's plane had to make an unscheduled stop, so they ran into some kind of a problem as well. And one of the big events that people were hoping was going to happen was Trump having a face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin. And following the Kerch incident, it went back and forth a couple of times, and as of the last word, Trump will not meet with Vladimir Putin. Putin's response is, good, that gives me more time to talk to other people. But interestingly enough, even though Trump has canceled the meeting, obviously under outside pressure, he refuses to say Russia's at fault for what happened in the Kerch Strait. So he's drawing a lot of criticism for that. You know, of course it's Russia. Russians are evil, so forth and so on. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And if you're a little late to the show, the big story, a quick repeat. There's been an air battle over Syria, and Syria's air defenses are claiming to have intercepted successfully 4 Israeli missiles and 1 Israeli warplane before they could carry out their mission. So we're still waiting to find out what aircraft that might have been here. Turning to our more domestic politics, there are a lot of people talking about Michael Cohen's pleading guilty. He's got a new plea agreement. We're going to be talking about that. But interestingly enough, the neocons really are, unfortunately, taking over the White House. And basically, Mary Kissel, who's a Wall Street Journal editorial writer, has been given a senior position at the Department of State by Mike Pompeo, even though she's a never-Trumper. She's openly hostile to him here. Now, a lot of this is starting to get tangled up with this whole situation with Julian Assange. And as you know, somebody leaked out, I think at this point it was intentional, that there are sealed charges against Julian Assange. Now, supposedly, these charges go back to the Chelsea Manning leaking of video. But Robert Mueller is out there trying to basically build a case that Julian Assange was the conduit through which the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. And it focuses a lot on Paul Manafort. And apparently, The Guardian came out with a story saying that, yes, Paul Manafort had held secret talks with Julian Assange inside the Ecuadorian embassy just about the same time he joined Trump's campaign. Well, that one face planted because it turns out, looking at Manafort's passport records, he was never in Britain during that entire period of time. Manafort has been to England in 2010 and 2012. And you have to wonder, why did The Guardian go to press with this story without a basic fact check? Well, because it's a smear. Now, Paul Craig Roberts came out with a very interesting article saying there is actually no case against Julian Assange. So lies take the place of evidence. Julian Assange is not guilty of any crime, but Washington wants to basically crucify him as an example to whistleblowers. They tried to build this case that Manafort went to the Ecuadorian embassy and met with Assange and some Russians. But the Ecuadorian embassy has turned over copies of all their logs, and there are no meetings. So it's getting pretty shameless out here. Now, Jerome Corsi is going on the offensive. He says he intends to file criminal charges against the special counsel, Robert Mueller. And Corsi was basically on Hill TV, and he wasn't pulling any punches, describing Mueller as a political hack and a criminal. And they're going to file charges with the Department of Justice because of the way the investigation was being conducted was clearly fraudulent, and it's time for Robert Mueller to be criminally investigated. Okay, so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Michael Cohen is going to plead guilty in the Mueller probe. He's pleading guilty to one charge in the special counsel's investigation about making false statements to Congress about his contacts with Russians during the 2016 presidential campaign. And basically, this has nothing to do with the election. Apparently, Cohen was in Moscow in 2015 trying to build a new Trump Tower. That's it. But they're trying to turn that into this horrific case of, see, he was talking to Russians, that makes him guilty. But interestingly enough, over at 12160, they have an article that basically says, if you look at the constantly changing, contradictory statements that Michael Cohen's been making all along with his admission now that, yes, he did lie, that he may be almost useless as a witness, and Robert Mueller may use him as a media star, but not much else. By the way, a little fact about Robert Mueller, and this goes all the way back to Jeff Epstein with his little orgy island. And before he had his private island, of course, he was doing what he was doing in Florida, and he got caught, and he got arrested, and he got a wrist slap. And the records were all sealed. But apparently, yesterday, the Miami Herald got an extensive report on Epstein's atrocious behavior. And apparently, inside there, Epstein abused dozens, if not hundreds, of teenage girls. And of course, it's known that former President Bill Clinton flew on his private jet as well, where there was a lot of stuff going on. So, Epstein molested all these people, and he got a 13-month sentence for his years of child sex abuse. Robert Mueller was director of the FBI when this all came down. Just all one mass of corrupt people. It really is. All right, so let's look at the other conflict zones around the world here. Apparently, U.S. airstrikes have killed yet another 30 civilians in Afghanistan's Helmand, including children and women. And they're starting to see a spike in civilian deaths from these attacks. Now, supposedly the airstrike was called in by American advisors, claiming that they came under fire from Taliban militants in a compound in the Garmsir district. And they're saying at the time of the strike, the ground force was unaware of any civilians in or around the area. They thought Taliban was using the building as a staging point. Meanwhile, a roadside bomb has killed 3 more U.S. servicemen in Afghanistan. And Lieutenant Uban Mendy, who's a spokesman for the U.S. forces, said in a statement that 3 other service members and 1 American civilian contractor were injured in the blast. The wounded have been evacuated and are being provided medical care. And the Taliban is taking responsibility for these improvised explosive attacks here. Now, there is a analyst, Rodney Martins, a former congressional staffer. He lives in Los Angeles now. And he basically has come on out saying that Afghanistan is becoming a graveyard of U.S. troops. We've been in there for 17 years, and U.S. military strategy in Afghanistan has failed to achieve any victories. In fact, the Taliban has been gaining ground. The U.S. is there to basically guard the pipeline, guard the opium poppies, and keep the puppet government in place, but they're not really succeeding very well. And Rodney is saying the United States is going down the path of other great powers that went into Afghanistan, such as Great Britain and the Soviet Union. So, now here's a little interesting story. This came out of News Punch. Apparently, the Inspector General, John Sopko, who was designated a special Inspector General for Afghanistan, Obama wasted at least $300 million on the salaries of people who apparently did not exist, who were supposedly operating in Afghanistan. far away from the prying eyes of U.S. oversights. And Sopkow is saying, this is major fraud. And there's a legitimate question. Where did this money go? So, anyway. Now, Senator Chuck Grassley, early this month, came on out with a statement saying that 4 years ago, he asked the Intelligence Community Inspector General to release 2 congressional notifications written by former CIA Director John Brennan and former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. Grassley had his requests ignored repeatedly. But now that all of the Obama people at the CIA and DNI are gone, he submitted the application again, and this time his request was approved. And what they found in there was written confirmation that John Brennan ordered CIA hackers to intercept the emails of all potential or possible intelligence community whistleblowers who may have been trying to contact the congressional oversight committees, specifically the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Judiciary Committee. In other words, Brennan hacked the Senate email system, which was totally illegal. He had no probable cause, he had no warrants, he had nothing. Just went in and did it. So, Banana Republic kind of stuff here. Now, down on the Syrian border, there's a lot going there. The U.S. is now building a line of what they are describing as observation posts along the Syrian-Turkish border. And it's clear the United States doesn't want to leave, especially with what happened earlier today. Syria is still in play. They don't want to have to admit they lost one. They don't want. There's the reason we're still in Afghanistan. They don't want to admit they lost it, because that would derail the rest of the war agenda. Apparently, just yesterday, Russian air defense forces intercepted and destroyed an unmanned aerial vehicle near the Russian Khmeimim air base in the province of Latakia, and it was probably an armed UAV launched by militants in a fresh attempt to attack Russian personnel and aircraft deployed at Khmeimim. So it's still stirring around over there. Now, the numbers about the opposition keep jumping all over the place. The other day we were talking about, somebody was saying it was 3,000, maybe it's 2,000. But according to this article out of Fort Russ, there are still 15,000 Al-Qaeda terrorists in Idlib. And apparently they're part of the al-Nusra Front, and they're in Idlib. And apparently Russian President's special envoy to Syria, Alexander Lavrentiev, announced this just yesterday, and saying that Russia stands ready to provide all possible assistance, including with the participation of units of Syrian government forces. So it looks like that deconfliction zone, or the calm down, well, it's effectively over. And I think this morning's airstrikes pretty much nailed that one here. Once again, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, militants of the terrorist group Daesh, or ISIS, or whatever they're calling themselves this week, are planning an attack using chemical weapons and trying to put the blame on Bashar al-Assad. And again, what's missing is the motive. So it's there. Now, we have to take a break here for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program, and getting on back to the air battle over Syria. Basically, the numbers have firmed up. 1 Israeli combat plane and 4 missiles. Still no word on exactly what kind of plane was shot down. But I think probably Israel got a real wake-up call, and from Russia's point of view, shows those S-300s work. So along with the S-300 and the S-400, the Russians are sending a clear message to the U.S. and Israel with the deployment of the Sukhoi 57s. And they've been the focus of special attention because they're in Syria, they're conducting combat missions in Syria, and it seems to be an amazing aircraft here. So all it's going to take is one person to make a mistake, a really bad one, in Syria, the Kerch Strait, anywhere. And as I've said before, one of my major concerns is the degree of automation that is in modern weapons with faulty software. And we've mentioned before the incident that led to the USS Vincennes shooting down of the Iranian passenger jet. It was a software glitch. And the ship killed the plane before humans could intervene. It was that fast. Same thing with the accidental shoot down of TWA 800. They were testing a brand new system, Aegis CEC, and the system made a mistake, turned and killed the wrong aircraft. That can happen. What happens if one of these ships in the Azov Sea just starts shooting? Anyway, getting on back to Syria, apparently up in the northeastern part of the country, the U.S.-backed militias are trying to basically recruit by force the Arab tribes. And the Arab tribes are absolutely not happy about that. They don't want to be dealing with the conscription. And apparently the tribes have issued a statement condemning the forced conscription of young men, saying they will not allow their sons to join the militia, and they're planning a general strike. So it's kind of fallen apart up there here. Okay, now the United States is now accusing Iran of launching a missile capable of reaching Europe. This is coming out of the State Department, which is claiming, for what it's worth, Tehran is producing several types of missiles that threaten U.S. partner countries in the Middle East and jeopardize American forces in the region. Well, look who's flinging missiles and bombs everywhere. And the whole point of having these kind of weapons is to threaten people, to get them to leave you alone. So anyway, U.S. Special Envoy for Iran, Brian Hook, claimed that the U.S. will be unveiling new evidence of Iran's ongoing missile proliferation. The Iranian threat is growing, and we are accumulating risk of escalation in the region if we fail to act. Now, there's government doublespeak for you. What he's saying is that we have to escalate the situation in the Middle East, or somebody else will. That's what he's really saying. Now, Ayatollah Khamenei has come out with a statement saying that Iran is not seeking to start war with any country, and that's certainly been their history for hundreds of years, and certainly since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. But he is saying that it is very obvious that we live in a time of increased hostilities, and so that Iran has a legitimate justification for building up its defensive weapons systems. And again, the world has seen this play out before. The U.S. comes on into a country and says, surrender these weapons and we'll guarantee your safety. Followed by an invasion, regime change. They did it to Iraq, they tried to do it to Syria. So it almost feels like this war is going to be going for real before Christmas. I think the war hawks are realizing that the people, not just of the United States, but of the entire world, they're sick of all these wars. They want it to stop. And it almost feels like somebody's saying, we got to get this going. We got to get this going. We're desperate here to get this thing going. Great Britain has started a series of what are called combat readiness drills with Saudi Arabia. They've sent aircraft and servicemen for this joint drill, despite international pressure to wind down military cooperation with Riyadh after the Khashoggi murder and the devastating war in Yemen. But apparently around 200 Royal Air Force servicemen and 8 Typhoon jets are now in Saudi Arabia taking part in these exercises. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call now from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'd like to talk a little about Syria and the Ukraine, if I could, and start out by saying that back in 1991, Assad's father contributed a full armored division to taking down, to fight alongside American troops to take down Saddam Hussein in 91. They have never been territorially aggressive. They are secular. The Ba'athist regime, they're secular, like Saddam Hussein himself was a Ba'athist and
yes.
secular. And and after the 911, whatever it was on 911, they were cooperated with the CIA and the FBI in trying to corral these international terrorists, and were allowed themselves to be used by the CIA and the FBI and MI6 as rendition points to torture people, where the CIA would go and torture them in Syrian territory. I also would point out that if you remember back in 2003 when we invaded Iraq, and of course there were no weapons of mass destruction, but you remember the rumor that was started all over the place on the major convoys that were carrying weapons of mass destruction from Iraq into Syria, where they
yes.
were hiding. Remember that?
I remember all that.
That was an effort even back then. There was an effort made by the Israelis, of course, to shift us into going after Syria even then. We will never leave. I know you keep saying the game is over. Mike, it's not. It's not over until the Russians and the Syrians eradicate every freaking one of the ISIS and, frankly, U.S. troops that are in the area, and British and Israelis and everybody else, because it will be a failed state. They failed in getting rid of Assad, but they can make it a failed state, and
yes.
that is what they're doing.
Yeah, they're going to trash the place.
They're trashing it. Will forever be a failed state in order to, of course, to keep it from being any threat to Israel and maybe even reclaiming the Golan Heights, which belongs to them legally, and so on and so forth. At the same time, all these people, that precipitated initially the situation in the Ukraine, Victoria Nuland and the neocons that pushed us in there. You remember that they were caught on record as saying, we gave $5 billion to seed the revolution. Remember, initially in 2011, that was done by Victoria Nuland and Hillary Clinton and the neocons. And we're not going to let that go either, as suicidal as that is. We're eyeball to eyeball with the Russians in two places, one of which, especially the Ukraine and Crimea, they will definitely fight. And half the people that died in the Great Patriotic War, World War II, 27 or 30 million, half of those died, getting the Germans out of the Ukraine. They died in the Ukraine or on behalf of the Ukraine. So it's a horrible situation, Mike, and we would not be there. And by the way, now we're arming the Kurds yet again, the MEK, to use against Iraq, and we have been using them all along against the Syrians whenever we could. And sooner or later, because we need Turkey a lot more than we need the Kurds, we'll sell them out like we sold them out in 1991.
Yes,
because. And there'll be hundreds of thousands of deaths at the hands of the Turks, and maybe the Syrians, maybe all the people we're stirring the Kurds up against. So it's us, Mike. It's us. It's the Israelis. We are the problem. It's the neocons. They're the problem, and it we'll never let it go. We're locked now. We're locked in two places, eyeball to eyeball with the Russians, and we're unwilling to let go.
Well, it looks like the military-industrial complex got their new Cold War, and that means the money's going to be pouring out of your pockets and into their pockets, which was obviously a big part of the agenda.
Yeah. And your comment yesterday, the day before, about this Kerch situation with the Sea of Azov and all that,
yes,
was very apt. It might very well have been just one more time, like when Trump said he wanted to get the U.S. out of Syria, and then like 3 days later, the Air Force launched a huge strike that killed Russians. Remember?
Yes.
It's just one more time that the military-industrial complex, the Israelis, the Israeli lobby, the neocons are not going to let this go. They're just not going to do it. We'll either have to get rid of them or they'll get rid of us. They're not letting go of this. So, there's no other way to say it. I mean, we either get them out of government and out of policy making, or they're going to take us all down.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right here, because I don't think they can keep this war cold. They're pushing on too many people, too many different places. And again, going back to history, the U.S. government has a pattern of when they mess up the economy really bad, they try and get into a world war, not necessarily to fix it, but to distract from it and have an excuse for it, while the economy tries to struggle back. But we're in an era of just unprecedented corporate greed, and the world is just very unbalanced. Life is very much out of balance. Koyaanisqatsi, as the Native Americans would say. And there are days I get up and I just sit here wondering, when is it really going to uncork? Because it just seems like we can't just keep the state of tension going forever.
It can't be long. It can't be far off, Mike.
Nope.
And as catastrophic as we all see it, and I hear Dustin and Mark and all these, everybody sees this, but nobody can stop it because our government doesn't respond to us. It responds to money from foreigners. It responds to a fifth column. It responds to everybody but us. And our foreign policy is not ours. It's foreign countries.
Yes.
Here we are, nose to nose, and they're not going to let go. So that's my comment, Mike.
Well, they want their war. What can I tell you? They want their wars. They make money off of them. In some cases, we're just dealing with total psychopaths who think the world is their plaything, and some are in politics, like the Clintons. Some are just money junkies like George Soros, but it seems that at a certain level of wealth and power, something goes wrong in the brain. And everybody sits there saying, yes, this nice little planet here, I think I'll play around with it and see what it'll do.
I can never understand, Mike, why we don't, as heinous as I think the NDAA and, imprisonment without trial and all the stuff that they can do, and the Patriot Act, I wish the hell they would use that against George Soros. Who else would be the first person that really is, if you're going to take one person out in the whole world that's really endangering the United States, it's George Soros, of course, the number one donor to the Hillary Clinton campaign and all, but I mean, this whole thing with on the borders, all these revolutions he's funded, I mean, the destabilization of our own government. I mean, why we have all these target assassinations, which I'm wholly against, but as long as we're doing them, geez, let's direct them somewhere where they'll do some good instead of some ridiculous Taliban chieftain somewhere or something. This guy's the enemy and people like him, but
I see him
whatever.
as an enemy to humanity, and even worse, amidst all the other turmoil and possible agendas that are out there, there are certain sects of Christians, and I know Soros is Jewish, but there are certain sects of Christians who honestly think that their religion requires them to try and bring about Armageddon. And they seriously believe this. And if you have people like that in positions of power with their fingers on the button, they could really do it.
Except, Mike, they're never, their fingers really aren't, they enable the people with the fingers on the power. They're just useful pawns. Nobody's going to give them any real responsibility, but there they are, beating the drum for Syria, beating the drum for the Ukraine, and they're just useful idiots of the Israeli lobby and the neocons. And there we go, bigger budgets and whatever, and why we can't use like the RICO statutes on these guys, like Soros, like the lobby.
Soros is already guilty of violating the USA Patriot Act by funding all these domestic terrorist groups to use violence and the threat of violence to coerce a change in the American political landscape. That is defined as an act of terror under the USA Patriot Act. But, Soros is writing checks to everybody, and nobody wants to touch him. And even if somebody were to arrest him, he's got enough money where the lawyers will keep whatever he's charged with on appeal until he dies a peaceful, natural death.
But theoretically, Mike, with the NDAA, theoretically, Donald Trump, or whoever the president may be, can draw a line through his name and anybody else's name and arrest them, confiscate all their complete property, and whisk them off to Guantanamo or something without a phone call to any lawyer, and torture them on the way, by the way. Kill them, frankly. Thanks to Obama, he claimed the right to kill people like that.
Yep.
So, I mean, as much as it's totally dictatorial and I hate it, as long as you're going to use it, let's use it against a real enemy. And this guy's a real enemy.
I'm afraid that stuff was not designed to be used against the rich and powerful. It was aimed at us, we the people.
Yeah, that's for sure. Can I ask before I go, and I'll leave you to answer this, I would. I didn't hear what happened. There was an air battle or something, and the Israelis got a plane knocked down?
Yeah, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the story. It's circulating around the globe right now here, but the short version is Israel launched an attack into Syria last night. Israel is saying they hit their targets. The Syrian air defense system is saying no. They downed all the missiles that were fired, and they shot down an Israeli warplane. They still haven't said if the pilot survived or not, and they haven't reported on just what kind of airplane it was. Because if Israel did use an F-35 and it got tracked and shot down by that S-300, that is going to be a disaster for the sales, because without its stealth capability, it's a piece of junk.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Thanks so much, man. We'll talk to you another time.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. Getting on back to the international news here. Situation in Israel, Palestine, like everywhere else, it's escalating. Is there one place on earth where everything's kind of like calming down? Just say, let's relax. Well, in theory, here in Hawaii, but it gets wild around here as well. Anyway, the Palestinian ambassador to Egypt basically came on out and said there will be no settlement without Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. And this was during an Arab League meeting held ahead of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And he's saying that Palestine will not accept any political plan that does not explicitly include the establishment of an independent Palestinian state on the territories occupied by Israel in 1967. So I think they're sending a message that Trump's deal of the century may well be a non-starter. And given how one-sided it's already appearing to be based on the leaks that have come out about it, yeah, there's no reason for them to go for it. I think the strategy from Israel is to basically starve the people of Gaza to the point of death and then just say, just sign this little paper here. Just sign this little paper giving up your right of return and we'll get you a Big Mac or something. Meanwhile, the Israeli Supreme Court yesterday ruled in favor of the Jewish National Fund for ownership of 129 acres of Palestinian-owned land. And apparently the Palestinians had appealed in the Israeli Central Court decision handing over the land to the JNF. Now, the reason this is so fuzzy, the Jewish National Fund was created back when Israel was first being founded, and it was given a lot of money with which to try and buy up as much Palestinian land as they could. And the Jewish National Fund is claiming that it purchased the land in question from a Palestinian family all the way back in 1944. The problem is there doesn't seem to be any record to support that. So the Israeli court just, it's yours now. And that means that these settlers are going to be able to build with impunity. Meanwhile, Israeli squatters in the West Bank are uprooting 1,000 Palestinian olive trees a month. That's 800,000 since 1967. I don't know, maybe they think olive trees are anti-Semitic or something. But the reality is this is an economic war on the Palestinians because one of their major export industries are olives. And that's why they grow and tend the olive trees. And the problem, though, is it takes 10 years to grow an olive tree to the point where it produces saleable product. So, anyway. Now, remember that story that came on out over Airbnb, which decided it was not going to list rental properties built in the illegal settlements. Well, apparently some Jewish Americans are suing Airbnb in federal court to go ahead and do those listings and not ban them, which is kind of weird because only a few weeks ago, during that whole Facebook and Google thing, we were hearing, well, they're a private company. They can do what they want, can't they? Well, we're going to take another break for commercials here. We've got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go to the phones to John in Rancho Cucamonga. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael. You've got another good show as usual.
Thank you.
And I just want to enter into two general arenas. As I told the screener, and anyway, the board man. And I just want to. Your previous caller, I guess, was Peter from Los Angeles. I've heard him quite a bit before. Mm-hmm. You know, I agree with just about everything he says. I don't even know I've ever disagreed with him. But I did want to add another level of a dismal evaluation to what he was saying. He made it sound like it's you and me and him and then the people at RBN. We're getting completely ignored. Well, by the people who could do something about the feudal, what appears to be the feudal situation, the way our country is going, and the eventuality of some kind of a catastrophic collapse, which will involve some type of fight. I'll just say it that way. I'm just, the more I think about it, I don't know how much Peter does talking or questioning or talking to people or friends of his and so forth. But I know in my town, one of the big problems I see is that, and you expressed your frustration that this is sometimes, when are these young kids who are volunteering? It's a volunteer army the U.S. government's got. Why do they keep volunteering? When are they going to start getting a message? And I've heard our other talk show hosts say the same thing, and that's quite true. But there's a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people that I know who are to a person, man or woman, they support the troops. I keep asking why. well, what for? And then they look at me like I'm out in left field somewhere. We have a discussion when it ever comes up, and pretty much they walk away, and I pretty much say, I'm not going to repeat all the things I say. But I ask them, can you please name me one right, freedom that you or I have sitting in this bar or restaurant that the troops in Afghanistan have successfully defended for us? And they can't. They never thought about it that way before. So
Yeah.
anyway, so that's it. I'm at what would be called at best a fallen away Roman Catholic, and I think more and more people are getting that drift in my local church. So I'm not sure how much my comments would be of interest to anybody there anymore, because they all wear decals on the back of their car saying, the wreath saying they support the troops. The northern end of the communion rail has got a shrine to the people in our parish who have gone over and support the troops and the 2 or 3 that were killed. And, and so that's just, there's just a ton of people in this country, my point was, in a long-winded way, that really support everything that's going on, so it's not.
Well, I don't think it's as many as you might think. I think, I'll tell you what, stay on the line. I'm going to hold you over. Stay on the line.
Sure.
We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. We're talking with John in Rancho Cucamonga. And John, you should never confuse silence with consent. Now, we're all raised to just go along with what the government says. But
right.
Very often, there'll be people who will pay lip service to the wars out of a sense of politeness or the idea that they don't want to be seen as unpatriotic. And that's part of the brainwashing that we're all
right.
raised with in order to make us accept wars when they are manufactured for us. But in talking to people around here, once you get past that formal politeness, you start to see how they're really feeling about it. There's a lot of very scared people around here right now. Of course, a large part of that has to do with the fact that we have a first strike nuclear target right out this window. So I don't think as many people are supporting these wars as you might think. Certainly the corporate media is going to be out there trying to convince you that, yes, Americans love the war. Americans love the sting of battle. We love winners. We will not tolerate losers. That wonderful opening speech from Patton by George C. Scott. But I think there's a lot of war fatigue building up in the general population. And I think a lot of Americans want this all to stop. They want it to go away. And I think that's why all of a sudden it seems to be accelerating.
That may be true, and you could be correct. I do agree that a lot of people probably are not as vociferous as some of us are about stating our views on things.
Yes.
And I'll just summarize it this way, Michael. I do really strongly feel, and I don't have any quantitative statistical surveys to give you, but I don't think anyone that I know of is ready to say that the two enemies on this planet called Earth, our enemies, are the U.S. government and the state of Israel.
Yep. Well,
Okay.
I'm seeing more and more people coming on out criticizing Israel now. They're not backing down in the face of anti-Semite. Unfortunately, there was that one guy over at CNN who just lost his job for speaking out. But
Right.
Well, we're getting a lot more callers into the show here, and I try and keep the discussion civil and polite. But I think a lot of Americans are just wondering, why is it always Israel that says you should go kill Iraq, or you should go kill Syria, and you should go and do Iran for us next? And now they're talking about Israel wants the U.S. to go into Djibouti down in Africa and confront the Chinese. Can Israel confront their own enemies? They certainly have the weapons to do it with. They've got nuclear weapons.
I think Israel is being very blatant about it very recently also, and hopefully that's being picked up on by a large number of people. And I won't belabor that point anymore. Michael, I did have one last thing, and so someone else can get a call in. earlier you were talking about the USS Vincennes incident.
Yes.
And then you mentioned the TWA Flight 800. I do recall that it was the U.S. government did finally, after a couple of years, I think it was, did finally admit that it was the problem with the system and the inability to recognize the difference in their whatever their system is called. I forgot the name for it. And for the Vincennes. But I don't recall ever on Flight 800, TWA Flight 800, that the U.S. government ever admitted that there was the same type of a thing going on there. I don't recall it. Did they ever declassify that information?
They never did, and obviously, it was bad enough when they shot down an Iranian passenger jet, on the other side of the world, to do it right off the coast of New York City.
Right.
Would have really shocked the American people. But they did officially admit that the Vincennes Aegis system assigned the same target tracking number to two different aircraft, one the passenger jet, the other an F-14, and the computer sort of created this hallucination of an attacking F-14 and shot it down.
Yeah. Okay. So that was, you don't have any other sources on Flight 800, do you? That has been written about or declassified in any way, or did the U.S. government offer to pick up the insurance policies for all the dead victims or anything like that you know of, or?
Well, I don't know about that. If there was a settlement to the families or anything like that. It's been a while. Let's be very honest about that.
I could have missed that too. So I don't remember that.
I do have a permanent article on TWA 800 up in the gray box at the top of my page if you want to wander through the nostalgia.
Okay. Well, look, I just want to get that cleared up. Okay, Mike. Well, thanks a lot for your time. Okay.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open, 800-313-9443. And to nobody's surprise, Israel is already denying that they lost one of their warplanes over Syria. So, we've got two completely different stories. We've got the one from Syria, that they repelled the missile attack and shot down 4 incoming missiles and the warplane, and Israel is now saying basically their attack was a success and they hit these Iranian communications bunkers. So we'll give it a couple of days, but I imagine that Syria are going to have some photographers on the ground taking pictures of the wreckage, and we'll find out what really was going on here. But I can imagine a lot of this has to do, believe it or not, with weapons sales. Because if the S-300 really worked that well, people are going to want to buy it. And especially if they lost an F-35, that's going to be a hammer blow for that project. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Okay, last Tuesday, there was a closed-door meeting where Pompeo and Mattis basically testified on the death of Khashoggi, to which Gina Haspel, the CIA director, was forbidden to attend, apparently on orders directly from the White House. And we know why that is. The CIA's official position is that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman did order the death. And it's a big political stink ball. And everybody knows this is all about the money. The Pentagon is out there saying, look, we got to stay friends with Riyadh. There's a $15 billion THAAD arms deal on the table. And if Riyadh gets annoyed at the United States, they'll just start buying stuff from, for example, Russia, the S-400. It's all about the money. It's all about propping up U.S. arms sales here. Now, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is already down at the G20 venue, but it's probably going to be very uncomfortable for him because he's apparently going to be met with protests, snubs, and even a possible prosecution by Venezuelan authorities for war crimes committed in Yemen. So that would be a tremendous embarrassment. But of course, it would give Crown Prince bin Salman what for without damaging the relations between Riyadh and the United States. Now, interestingly enough, there was an article that came out of 12160 asking if there is a coup still in the works against Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And apparently, Reuters came out with this report written by Andrew Korko, alleging that members of the Saudi monarchy are conspiring against Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And they're citing unnamed sources that supposedly reveal a plot to replace Mohammed bin Salman with his uncle, Prince Ahmed, the younger brother of the current king, who came back from his self-imposed exile. And apparently they're looking at the issue of the king's will, saying it doesn't necessarily have to be respected after his retirement or passing if the so-called Allegiance Council doesn't approve of his successor. So it looks like, yeah, there's going to be an issue. Now, Mohammed bin Salman has really shaken up a lot of Saudi Arabia. There was that controversial anti-corruption campaign last November, his progressive modernizing of socioeconomic policies. He's being accused of basically undermining the institutional pillars of half a century of al-Saud rule. So they do not like him. And as I mentioned before, I suspect that the United States doesn't see him as being as controllable as they would like. Okay. Now, there's this analyst and writer, Adam Gary, and he's looking at what's going on with all this talk about Iran's nuclear weapons and Syria. And he's basically come on out and said the real problem are rogue regimes like Israel, who have illegal nuclear weapons. They're not inspected, they're not tracked, nobody knows how many there really are. And Israel has a history of belligerence toward its neighbors. And apparently, Russian diplomats are trying to caution the United States to stay within that intermediate range nuclear forces treaty, which dates back to the end of the Cold War. And it's seen as basically a way of banning ground-launched nuclear missiles with ranges from 500 kilometers to 5,500 kilometers, which led to the elimination of nearly 2,700 short and medium-range missiles. Well, if Trump does pull out of the INF, obviously the U.S. is going to start building missiles that operate that range. So will Israel. In fact, Israel may already have them. Okay, now, down in Africa, the third smallest country is Djibouti. And like a lot of countries with limited resources, they're struggling to basically get along. Now, usually small countries with limited resources will turn themselves into financial centers where dodgy banks and companies find a haven from international regulators in order to hide their taxes. Places like the Cayman Islands, for example. But apparently down in Djibouti, they hit upon a different plan. They're hosting military bases for all kinds of countries. Come on in, have a military base. You're going to give us so much money for the rental. You'll spend all kinds of money in our country. And apparently it's working. It's working very well. And one of the nations that is taking advantage of this access to Africa is China. And so in this article from Breaking Defense, Israel to the U.S. take on China around Djibouti. And it's basically out there saying the United States should boost its military presence in Djibouti and the region surrounding the Bab al-Mandab Strait to counter an increasingly assertive and belligerent China, say Israeli intelligence officials and independent experts. Actually, I have a message from the U.S. to Israel. Take on China yourself. We're tired of fighting the wars you direct for us. because they're not doing anything for our country. They aren't. Not a thing. I mean, just ask yourself, after all this money that we have poured into Israel, all the weapons we poured into Israel, how has that helped the quality of life here in the United States of America? So, up in Germany, the Army has activated a new short-range air defense unit, the first such unit stationed in the country since the end of the Cold War. And this is the 5th Battalion, 4th Air Defense Artillery Regiment, was activated at Schipten, Kesserin, and Ansbach. Army officials in Germany said Wednesday. Basically, it's a tracked vehicle, and it holds multiple launchers with Stinger missiles. Okay. Well, now we're getting another article saying that Trump will meet with Putin. Boy, it's just bouncing all over the place here. Now, here's an article, and it's an indicator of just how dangerous things are getting. There's a Tory member of Parliament, Johnny Mercer, and he is the member of Parliament from Plymouth, and basically came on out saying that killing people for what you believe in is acceptable. There's nothing wrong for killing what you believe in. And saying the application of violence to defeat the enemies of the nation has become worryingly unpopular. So he's out there saying, war, it's fantastic. And of course he directs it, we're going to have to stand up to Russia in the traditional sense. So Johnny, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit. Now this one is a little bit silly. Apparently, the U.S. Army Recruiting Command has issued a memo to all military recruiters that says they are now banned from going to strip clubs. And apparently the reason was public image, because recruiters are the most public-facing element of the U.S. Army. Well, I would understand if you would say, don't wear your uniform in there. But what if they're in jeans and a t-shirt? Now, we've been talking about the Gerald R. Ford, and we've been talking about a lot of America's weapons, which don't really work all that well and don't seem to be worth the money. But apparently, Senator Tim Kaine was sort of digging into just what's going on with the ship. Now, the Gerald R. Ford is the lead ship of the Navy's next generation of flat tops. It's not a one-of-a-kind, and apparently he grilled the Assistant Secretary for the Navy of Research, Development, and Acquisition about all the things that have gone wrong with it. I mean, the electromagnetic catapult. I mean, even Donald Trump made fun of that, saying, steam has worked for 100 years. Why are we reinventing something that works? And apparently the latest issue has to do with what are called the weapons elevators, which are the elevators that bring ordnance from deep below the flight deck up to the flight deck. And reading between the lines, this guy is saying, well, we're thinking the Ford would leave the Newport News shipbuilding yard with a working system for delivering ordnance to the flight deck. He makes comments about making progress to get through all of the elevators during this availability. It sounds to me like they are still having problems, and they're afraid that Congress might say we need to go back to the drawing board, because the Navy is already talking about 3 more of the exact same type of aircraft carrier. Apparently over at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, Suzanne Spalding, who was the former Deputy Secretary for Cyber and Infrastructure Protection at the Department of Homeland Security during the Obama administration, actually came out and said that one of Russia Today's methods when it comes to its influencing vulnerable Americans is telling the truth. How nefarious can they get telling the truth? Actually said that. If you're a patriotic American, you will believe the lies. All right. Let's talk about the economic news here. Because of the tariff wars, the U.S. trade deficit is soaring to record highs. Exports are tumbling, and the October advance trade balance of goods worsened to $77.2 billion for that month. We're talking over $2 billion a day going out and not coming back on in. And it doesn't look to be getting any better anytime soon. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. I'm going to see about finding. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the economic news. We're talking about how our trade deficit is markedly worse, and it's having a ripple effect because farms in the Midwest are filing for Chapter 12 bankruptcy at an alarming rate. And they're laying the blame at the foot of Donald Trump's trade war. And it's causing a lot of harm. And it's more than just the farms. And so far, a total of 84 farms in the upper Midwest filed for bankruptcy protection, according to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. That's more than double the number of Chapter 12 filings during the same period in 2013 and 2014 in Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana. But here's where it really gets rough. This could trigger a food crisis in the United States. These are 84 large farms that are no longer producing agricultural product. So we're going to be seeing rising food prices along with everything else here. All right, financial writer and precious metals expert Bill Holter is out there saying we've reached the point of debt saturation. And he's saying we're looking at the dawn of a Mad Max world when this unpayable debt bubble pops. And when it all comes apart, nothing will work. Your electricity won't work, your car may or may not work. It's going to be really horrible. It's a house of cards. And here's the part that's really sick. The people who set up the private central banks knew all along that somewhere down the road that unpayable debt would bring the whole system crashing down. But they didn't care because they didn't expect to live that long. They got their central bank. They're getting all this money just, to have fun with and be elites with. Somebody else's problem when it falls apart here. Right now, the United States is spending $1.5 billion with a B just on the interest on the debt. $1.5 billion. That's $1.5 billion going into the pockets of the money junkies. What did they do to earn this $1.5 billion? Ink and paper and numbers in a computer. And some generous contributions to certain members of the political class here. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has ratified an interim agreement on the formation of a free trade zone between the Eurasian Economic Union and Iran. So Putin is still trying to steady things down, trying to keep it from ramping up here. By the way, you remember when Russia and Turkey did their deal for the S-400 missile system? They ditched the dollar. They did not go through the dollar. And I'm sure that is very annoying to the U.S. here. And I imagine Putin will have some comments about the U.S. dollar because he's sort of, down at the G20, because he's sort of teased it with some comments he's made recently about how, we don't have a goal of abandoning from the dollar, but we are being forced to do so. And I assure you, we will do it. And in Putin's view, it's going to make global trade more secure and efficient, not to mention free from weaponization through sanctions here. Now, Russia has a very low debt. It's running a budget surplus this year. much better buy than a U.S. bond for sure. And the international market may agree because Russia is issuing their next bond denominated in euros. So that may be very attractive to people as well here. Now, as you know, a lot of what drives the global strife has to do with oil and gas and who's going to buy our gas and who are we going to sell to. But apparently, the cost of American liquefied natural gas being exported to Europe is now more expensive than what's coming out of Russia. And so as they get into the winter, which is a prime profit season for LNG, we're going to see a decline in purchases of American product, and Russia's going to come out ahead. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of political arm twisting to get Europe to go ahead and buy our liquefied natural gas. Yes, it's more expensive, but you don't want to do business with those evil Russians. But oil company executives tend to be pragmatic about such things. Even just a few pennies on a barrel, multiplied by the sheer volume of the oil trade, can amount to a huge amount of money. All right, we're going to take yet another commercial break here, and when we come on back, we're going to be talking about the immigration crisis, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And what a crazy day. What a crazy, crazy day. Okay, so let's talk about the border. And there's this article from uns.com basically saying what I was saying a week ago. This border crossing thing is a crucial test for Donald Trump. And if he fails to keep that border secure, he's a one-term president. Now, what's interesting about this article is, let me start you with a quote here. Mass migration lit the flame of the right-wing populism that is burning up the old continent, and Europe must get a handle on it. Europe must send a very clear message. We're not going to be able to continue to provide refuge and support. Should Europe fail to toughen up, illegal migration will never cease to roil the body politic. This was actually said by Hillary Clinton. And Democrats have piled on Clinton for selling out progressivism. But she's basically following her political instincts. She's reading the tone of the public. And the public they've had it with the illegal immigrants and the refugees and all the problems they've caused. And so if she is seriously thinking about getting into the race in 2020, she's going to go back to saying what she thinks the public wants to hear. Now, there's some good news from the border and some bad news. Apparently, some of these migrants, hundreds in fact, of these migrants have turned around. They're going back to Central America because apparently this Tijuana sports complex where they're all being kept is it's showing the wear and tear, as it were. It only has 35 portable toilets, 9 showers. It's sheltering 6,000 people, and apparently tuberculosis, chickenpox, and lice are breaking out all over this facility, which reaffirms one of my major concerns about open borders is protecting the public health. And apparently they're saying there's a risk of a hepatitis outbreak. Now, the bad news is yet another new migrant caravan has arrived at the U.S. border. And by the way, they caught another MS-13 gang member traveling with the migrant caravan. Apparently, over in Arizona, some of these migrants have been able to sneak through gaps in that border over there. Now, Ann Coulter, sometimes I like her, sometimes I don't. But she's bang spot on with this one. Basically, Ann Coulter is out there saying, and she was in an interview with Sirius XM Patriot Breitbart News Daily, and basically said the Republican Party is at the point of extinction without a shot because of the mass illegal and legal immigration to the country that continues importing more than 1.5 million immigrants a year who always vote Democratic. And Coulter said, I have very little hope for the country. It's going to be bad. It's going to be Brazil first. We're about to lose Texas and Florida. Those elections were razor thin, and every day more and more immigrants turn 18 and start voting, canceling out all your votes. It's about 5 more years. Trump will be the last Republican president. Okay. Alrighty. Now then, over in France, Macron is still out there serving his globalist masters, and he's declaring a fight against Europe's nationalist leprosy. That's the exact word that he used. That if you believe in a strong country with strong borders and you want to put your country first, you're a leper. Unclean, unclean, unclean. And Macron has warned Europe of a return to the 1930s, meaning the post-World War II years, because of this nationalism. And this is one of many reasons why Macron is in trouble politically. Riots, low ratings. He hasn't lost his touch. He's actually starting to enable the populism he was supposed to defeat. Now, Germany's made a very odd request to France. They're asking France to hand over its permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council to be a general European Union seat. Well, if Germany thinks that was a really good idea, they could always turn theirs over. But basically, Germany has called for France to give up its permanent seat to give the EU more sway on the Security Council. And, of course, the leaders of France and Germany are still backing the creation of an EU army, a proposal Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson has described as crazy. Alrighty. Whether or not there's going to be a deal for Brexit is still very much up in the air. The Remainers are trying to find a way to delay the vote. 2 more years, give us 2 more years, we'll make it work. But tensions are very high. The rhetoric is getting very abrasive, as it were. And ordinary British families are starting to prep because the expectation is if there is a no-deal Brexit, it will be 4 months while they get the British economy back up and trade going. And so there are cans of baked beans, Marmite, and that's a smart thing to do. That is a smart thing to do. Meanwhile, Brexiteers have slammed the Bank of England chief when he came out with a statement saying that a no-deal Brexit would cause the worst recession since the 1930s and plunge housing prices by 30%. But he was blasted for what was called Project Hysteria in his obvious support of trying to get Theresa May's deal approved. Here's a good example of the rhetoric getting out of control. Apparently, a Scottish member of the European Parliament has accused the European Union of trying to stamp their boot on Britain with their latest offer for a Brexit deal. And Mr. Coburn previously branded the tentative agreement an insult to the United Kingdom, insisting Brussels should be paying tribute to the important role Great Britain played in defending the Nazis and in defeating the Nazis during World War II. And the EU is basically trying to do to Great Britain what the Nazis wanted to do. Okay, we have a caller on the line. Paul in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Michael, since you were talking about the neocons and getting into Middle Eastern wars, I would like to remind people that when it comes to the Iraq War I and Iraq War II, if you look at the voting record of who voted for those wars in the Congress, those wars wouldn't exist if the whole Congress was comprised of Democrats. It wouldn't have happened.
Yes.
Both of those wars were the result of Republicans and the Republicans wanting the wars. Now, if you factor in that Jews historically vote about 85 to 90% Democrat, you really can't pin those two wars on at least the average Jews in the street because they vote Democratic. As I said, the Iraq wars are Republican wars. And so we have to realize this. You know, when we're talking about the neocons and the neocons instigating wars. Likewise, we could say under Obama that those wars were Democratic wars, but, and this is why I almost respect the Machiavellian nature of using these ISIS proxies to do our fighting for us in Libya and in Syria, is sure it's totally treacherous and evil, but it doesn't cost the taxpayers trillions of dollars. They didn't, cause a lot of PTSD in soldiers.
Yes.
We don't have all these health problems of suicide soldiers in those conflicts because our soldiers didn't do the fighting. We didn't pay for the tanks or the shells. We might have provided some and a little bombing with NATO during the Libyan war. But generally, they were done on the cheap. And so I think we have to be honest about this when we talk about these topics about the neocon control. Now, of course, there are a lot of neocons in the Republican Party.
Yes.
We see the Christian right who idealize Israel and believe that Jews are God's chosen people, et cetera, and they want to defend Israel. So a lot of the onus for the Iraqi wars can put right at the lap of where it belongs, and that's in the Christian right and the Republican Party.
Okay.
And I'm curious if you agree with that analysis.
Well, I think you're being overly simplistic here. I mean, there were a lot of different groups that supported the war for a lot of different reasons, and they overlapped and they got their war. It was mostly about Iraq's decision to sell their oil for the euro. And we're talking the second Iraq war here, because the U.S. is dependent on the rest of the world using the U.S. dollar and backing that up with military force, whether it was Iraq or Libya, and they're going to keep on going. And it's insane. We're on the edge of a nuclear world war in this argument over which brand of ink and paper everybody is supposed to use. But that's the way the situation has evolved here in the United States, where we don't have the industry that we used to have. Our agriculture is not doing well at all between GMO and tariffs, but getting other countries to use the U.S. dollar and charging them interest on it or handling fees or whatever is pretty much all that's holding the economy up right now.
I agree. I think that's a big factor. But I just like to, you're right, though. There are many, many factors in different groups. You got the military-industrial complex. They want to sell weapons. You have people in the military who actually, want to join the military to be in a war or to just get the benefits of being in the military. And so we like to relive this bad history, to please your parents or whatever the motive of people signing and joining the military is, or for the benefits and all the rest. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, but they're burdens to the taxpayer, and it spreads, and it's really, in my opinion, a form of cultural poison for the rest of the world when they think of America, because people don't understand that, if we're seen as global troublemakers, that's not going to sell GM cars. That's not going to sell our merchandise. It's not going to promote our trade. And that's one of the benefits of why everybody loves China and Chinese goods throughout the world. Listen, China minds its own business. They just want to do business, and they don't have blood on their hands. So, there's no guilt in, making a purchase in China except for maybe how they treat their animals, or maybe the latest genetic experimentation.
Or their intellectual property violations, which are, unfortunately, sadly, epidemic.
Yeah, but in comparison to, crossing oceans to instigate battles and having the blood of millions of dead people on our hands for no reason, all volitional conflicts, right?
Yes.
We are just the rogue maniacs on the planet, and this, I think, is by the way, causes part of the moral decay in America among the youth. I mean, I almost think that, when you do really bad things, there is a collective guilt that the people carry around on the shoulders. And I think that's not just the troops committing suicide. I think that could be affecting the young kids in their nihilistic worldview about being Americans. And there's a moral element that people carry in them. And I don't think any of these people, in the think tanks ever consider that long term, although, Sun Tzu did bring that up in his book, The Art of War. How important it is to have a moral integrity and the, it's called the mandate of heaven.
Yes.
Where...
Well, what he was actually talking about was the necessity for the people of a nation to believe what they're doing is morally right. Not necessarily that they themselves are moral people, although obviously that's the foundation that you build on. You're a moral people. This is the moral thing to do. Let's have at them and chop off their heads and take their wealth. And as far as the kids are concerned, there's a lot of factors there as well. Part of it, of course, is the Common Core, which is now being acknowledged as being the biggest disaster for education in something like 40 years. It is our pop culture, which certainly pushes a lot of nihilism. And of course, the kids are looking at those who do get ahead in our society in terms of wealth and power and saying, I want to be like that. And that generally means that they're looking up to role models who are not necessarily moral people.
Yeah, but it seems like America should be put in a timeout box, in a sense, morally. And that's why we should, drop our imperialist designs and stop the meddling, close a lot of foreign bases, and just return to what George Washington and our founders intended of being neutral and just dispassionate players on the global scene. And I think over time we'll be forgiven, and there's very likely a new bad actor might pop up. But actually, I doubt it. I'm
in agreement. I mean, the United States I was born into is already gone. I think history books 50 years from now are going to look at the Stars and Stripes with the same revulsion our generation looked at the swastika.
Yeah, and one other factor for other people overseas to hate the United States is just the cultural, tranny agenda and the sexual, agenda is just a little over the top. And, Hollywood and the American culture, we shouldn't be pushing it so fast. You know what I mean? I would think some of the world would just be, in a sense, shocked by what is now normal on American TV screens. And again, that's for export too. That's part of American imperialism, as they call it, hamburger imperialism overseas. Yes. We push our culture, we push our junk fast food, the glyphosate, the fattened food, not just cigarettes anymore. And so, again, this is going to contribute to moral guilt and a domestic moral guilt. And so when people wonder why is the West losing its oomph, its drive, its like a sense of being, it's because we've lost all kind of moral integrity by what we've done.
Okay, well, Paul, thank you very much. We're going to have to let you go and take a break. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Man, all your listeners are spot on, Mike, tonight. From Peter from Los Angeles to Paul from New Jersey. Yeah, the only thing I got to say with Paul from New Jersey, Republicans start, but what's the difference now between a Republican and a Democrat? Like what Hillary Clinton voted for the war.
Yes.
But it's like Coke and Pepsi, two sides of the same coin. I mean, look at anti-Trumpers and this or that. I mean, there's no fun. I don't know. Just there's no difference anymore.
Nope.
Like it's a blurred line. It's pretty bad. Hey, Mike. You said that they had 16 S-400s, the launch tubes, it's 32. They had 4, and they brought 4 more in.
Okay.
So it's like I guess it's like a battalion. I guess 2 battalions almost. I mean, so it's 32 of those. Plus they got the KH-35. I mean, they brought a minesweeper in. So, or if it's a mine layer, I don't know.
Well,
it might.
That would definitely be an act of war to start laying mines. You're talking about the Syrian coast or the Kerch Strait.
Oh no, in Ukraine, Crimea.
Okay.
To bring in it might be a minesweeper.
Okay.
But hey, Mike, did you get a report that IDF? They came out and denied the plane got shot down, but they did that last time. Remember when the F-16 got shot down?
Yes.
Until the video footage, came out. So, I don't know if you heard anything new on it because I just tuned back in on the Syria thing. If there was a plane shot down or not.
During the commercial breaks, I'm looking at this, and of course, we're getting 2 exact opposite stories. Israel is now saying that a Syrian missile was fired at the Golan Heights, therefore they're bad and we're good, and it just goes on. But yeah, Israel would be well motivated to lie about losing a warplane, especially if it was an F-35, but somebody has to find the wreckage. That's what I'm waiting for. Now, people are starting to post videos of the actual engagement, which took place at night, so you can't see what the targets actually were. But there's one video, something really big did get blown up in that sky.
It's amazing, though, this incident's coming now with the incident in Ukraine not so far away. You know what I mean? It's a tag team match going right now. It's like these are the 2 big, the hot spots of the world. Obviously,
Yes.
It's Syria, Ukraine, back and forth, and they'll put more effort in Ukraine. But yeah, how much longer can this last?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like just saying, look, if you're going to have a world war, let's get on with it. Get it over with.
Yeah, because it is dragging on. And Mike, on a little lighter news, that pioneering Spirit, real quick, is moving to the Baltic to lay the pipe down for Nord Stream 2. That's all I got to say.
All right, well, thank you very much for that information. We're going to let you go here, take a break for station identification, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Do you remember a gentleman by the name of Wolfgang Halbig? He's a professional school safety consultant who waded in on the Sandy Hook shooting and said there were definitely reasons to suspect that it wasn't as presented by the corporate media. And a lot of the people who were pushing the official story said bad things about him on social media, and he sued for defamation. And unfortunately, for whatever political reasons, he lost and was required to pay the attorney's fees for the defendants. Well, he had to set up a GoFundMe page to try and get those lawyers' fees. But there's a little bit of good news, because apparently Justice Allison Danner on the bench of the California 6th District Court of Appeals issued a ruling just a couple of days ago reversing part of the Santa Clara County Superior Court decision in the lawsuit, basically saying that because they cannot determine how the trial court arrived at the attorney's fees it awarded, we cannot assess whether the trial court properly exercised its discretion. So apparently the amount he must pay has been drastically reduced here. Now, this is a statement, actually an announcement. I got it through Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. They, in turn, got it from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry on November 26, 2018. And basically what it comes down to is the United States Attorney agrees to comply with federal law requiring submission to a special grand jury of the report by the Lawyers Committee and 9/11 victim family members of yet to be prosecuted 9/11 related federal crimes. Now that's kind of long-winded, but basically attorney for the Southern District of New York has responded to this petition because it is the law. that lawyers can, in fact, go to a U.S. attorney and say, we need a special grand jury. And so they're actually going to start having a day in court for those who have a somewhat different opinion of what happened from 9/11, or on 9/11 here. Meanwhile, two people I really wish would go away. Well, three. I wish Hillary would go away. Stormy Daniels and Mike Avenatti. And apparently, Stormy is now claiming that Avenatti sued Trump for defamation against her wishes. That Avenatti was just driving this whole thing as part of his get Trump, get Trump, get Trump. And it's worth remembering that when Tucker Carlson told Michael Avenatti he was exploiting Stormy Daniels, he got criticized. Oh, how could you say that? Avenatti would never do that. Well, it turns out he was. So, let's see. Twitter is still out there banning people like crazy here. And the latest one is Megan Murphy. Now, this is the feminist who was banned from Twitter for stating that men aren't women. And she wrote an article for Quillette explaining how, in an earlier time, this would have been a banal statement. And today, it's like akin to terrorist speech. Now, Murphy has accused Twitter of censoring basic facts and silencing people, and was permanently suspended from the social network last week for stating, women aren't men, and how are trans women not men? What is the difference between a man and a trans woman? And after Twitter made Murphy delete the post, she made another post calling out Twitter and was blacklisted. And Megan is absolutely right. I mean, it's such a common sense thing for people of my age. Men and women, and it's all tied to the DNA and the plumbing, and this idea of gender fluidity. That last caller was right. What does the world, looking at all this trans stuff, what do they think of Americans? What kind of an image are we sending out? Now, Twitter also was briefly criticized for suspending the English language Vladimir Putin account. But as it turns out, it was a fake. Somebody just created this account to put out misinformation. And in this case, Twitter was definitely right to shut it down. Okay, for those of you who like to spend a lot of time on video games, you might want to pay attention to this one here. And I'm not saying that you're going to do anything this stupid, but it was. Apparently, last June, this 18-year-old Daniel Fabian of Pasco County, Florida, was playing Grand Theft Auto online when he informed the other players in his team that he was going to take a break to have sex with a girl who was visiting with him. Well, apparently he forgot to shut off that microphone because other players could hear over the headset the woman's saying no and cries of distress, and they called the police. So he's been arrested, and again, got to watch out for those. Actually, don't commit rape in the first place. What am I saying? I'm glad he got caught. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, here is a really wild one. Okay, apparently there was this sextortion ring targeting military service members, and 15 people have been charged. And basically what it was is the people who were doing this would go on multiple dating websites and pretend to be girls. And then they would send pictures of these girls or nude photos of some girl to these service members who were visiting these dating sites, who would then be contacted by another one of these perpetrators claiming the girl was his daughter and she was underage, and demanding payment rather than risk being reported to police. In all, 432 servicemen were scammed out of more than $560,000. Here is the punchline. This was all being run out of a South Carolina prison. These perpetrators were using illegally obtained cell phones. They would forward the money that was being paid to some of their associates on the outside, who would buy prepaid debit cards and bring them into the prison, so the prisoners had the money to spend. Where the heck were the prison guards and the warden when all of this was taking place? 432 servicemen. More than $500,000 here. Over at Google, we are seeing what may be the beginning of a popular revolt against the censoring of search results. And apparently more than 240 Google employees have signed an open letter calling on the company to abandon its plan for a censored search engine in China, as protesters took to the streets in 8 cities to condemn the project, known as Dragonfly. So Google is not what it once was. More and more people are leaving Google. They're going over to search engines that aren't censoring. Over at Rolling Stone, Matt Taibbi had another great article out there saying, who will fix Facebook? And he uses a story of one individual to illustrate the sort of things going on over at Facebook. And it centers around a gentleman named James Reeder, who basically lived in San Diego. He was a progressive, a liberal, and he set up a blog called Everlasting GOP Stoppers, GOP Stoppers. It's a play on Willy Wonka. And apparently it really took off, and they started running it. He actually got some investors, and they renamed it Reverb Press. And then all of a sudden during the 2016 campaign, Facebook deplatformed him. And so what Matt Taibbi is saying, the social media giant is banning innocent people, proving it cannot be trusted to regulate itself. Me, I'm old-fashioned. I think we ought to go back to the First Amendment. Everybody has a right to say whatever they want except fire in a crowded movie theater. I mean, freedom of speech is nice to have, but it does come with a responsibility. That you be truthful, respectful, you have the facts. Freedom of speech does not mean just babbling on about anything that pops in your little head here. Okay, Delta Airlines has announced that Terminal F, as in Foxtrot, in the Atlanta airport, is now the first fully biometric terminal in the United States, and now they're moving on to Detroit. I'm predicting they're going to have problems with that. I'm predicting they're going to have problems with that one here. Meanwhile, Amnesty International is demanding that Israel's Defense Ministry revoke the export license from a company whose spyware has been used in a series of egregious human rights violations. Now, basically this NSO Group Technologies was supposed to be sold only for law enforcement purposes. But apparently earlier this year was discovered to have been used to hack a phone belonging to one of the rights group's staffers over at Amnesty International. And that's definitely not something that we should be comfortable with. Over at Akamai, they've discovered an ingenious malware campaign that alters configurations on home and small office routers to open connections towards internal networks so crooks can infect previously isolated computers. Oh boy, there's a good one. How do we get around that? And the way hackers achieve this, Akamai said, is via a technique known as UPnP proxy, which Akamai first talked about in April of this year. And the technique relies on exploiting vulnerabilities in the UPnP services installed on some routers to alter the device's network address translations tables. So all of a sudden, your firewalled internal local area network is now wide open to the outside. Okay, over in Beijing, there is a computer company called Lenovo. We've all heard of them. And back in 2015, they got into trouble because it came on out that some 750,000 laptops had pre-installed adware called Visual Discovery developed by Superfish. The problem is that this adware compromised online security protections installed by the users on their laptops, accessing financial data, man-in-the-middle attacks on private and secure communications, due to which attackers could gain free access to the system and spy on encrypted communications. So Lenovo is being fined $7.3 million for that. I remember when, years ago when laptops were first coming on out, remember all the junkware that came with them? You'd open up the computer and boot it up, and there'd be all these ads and come-ons for games and everything. You'd have to spend hours just cleaning it all off because it was all memory and CPU hogs. Anyway, down in Australia, g'day, they're preparing to introduce at least 33 different gender options on birth certificates and passports as part of a new anti-discrimination policy. And this is coming out of the Australian Labor Party. They've drafted the initial proposal, which includes options such as omnigender, neutrios, and demigender. Now, omnigender means unisex. Neutrios is a non-binary gender identity which is often associated with a neutral or null gender. Demigender is an umbrella term for non-binary gender identities that have a partial connection to a certain gender. This is just getting plain silly. You need a smartphone app just to sort all of this stuff out. And if somebody wants to call themselves whatever on a passport, that's one thing. But birth certificates are issued for newborn babies. And you can look down and say, yep, that's a boy or that's a girl. The world's going crazy. The world is going crazy. Is it the prescription antidepressants? Is it something in the water? But it feels sometimes like the entire human race is going crazy. Over in Great Britain, a primary school in Devon has scrapped homework because it causes too much stress to the students and too much stress to the teachers. And the head teacher of Littletown Primary Academy, David Perkins, said the decision was made based on educational research, consultation with parents, children, and staff. All the students are being encouraged to read for 20 minutes in the evening. And they're going to be trying out this unconventional change between now and the end of the academic year, except for those who are in year number 6. That really is silly. Getting back on out to the California wildfires, a little bit of good news. And this made TV, and it's down in San Diego, where this real estate developer and restaurant owner, Bob Wilson, went over to one of the wildfire damaged schools and just started handing out checks to the teachers and students. 980 checks to students, another 100 to the staff at Paradise High School. The checks were for $1,000 each. Now, that was a very nice thing to do. And he said, basically, he didn't want to go through any kind of a formal charity because of the long delay of the money getting to them. He said, these people need the money right now. They want to help their family. They want to buy gasoline for the car, buy a bicycle. It's up to them. It's up to them. And he did it because he said he just couldn't imagine losing so much. Over 90% of the students and staff lost their homes. And while the school itself is still standing, the people attending it are suffering. They just lost the whole community. And they did. Now, a lot of people have been expressing their concern over this growing trend in the public libraries and even some schools for drag queen story hour, where they basically have a drag queen coming on in with sequins and glitter and full makeup, to read to children and toddlers. Parents don't like this, but the liberals are just pushing this. So basically, that one of these drag queens came on out and said, this is about grooming the next generation. And this is coming from Dylan Pondit, who helped organize a story hour for kids as young as age 3 at a Louisiana public library. He's shown in a video telling the Lafayette City Parish Council what's behind the very beautiful event. And he says right on the video, this is going to be the grooming of the next generation. We are trying to groom the next generation to be accepting of LGBT values. Three-year-old. Anyway, Saturday will be December 1st. We're going to be getting into the Christmas season. I still got to get my Christmas cards printed up. And it is amazing seeing all the political correctness that's already being targeted on Christmas. It's like there's a war on Christmas. There was that ad campaign that was pulled down because I'm Dreaming of a White Dorchester was declared to be racist. You've got white in it, it's racist. It's absolutely racist. The argument over whether to say Merry Christmas or Happy Holiday, it just gets sillier and sillier every year. And now, apparently, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is in the crosshairs of the liberals. We're going to take a break here for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And this hacking of holidays for political correctness, it's destroying the experience. You know, when I was a kid growing up, you know, you got dressed up on Halloween. You know, you talked about the Pilgrims and the Native Americans on Thanksgiving, and that was, you know, the culture. And then, of course, Christmas. And then New Year's, if you're living someplace where you're lucky enough to still be able to get fireworks. So apparently, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is in the crosshairs of the politically correct thought police. And we've all seen it. This thing was made years and years ago. It's stop motion animated. And every Christmas it gets shown. But now the liberals are out there saying, no, this is no longer acceptable. And apparently, when Rudolph's father is berating him about his red nose, pointing out his difference, it's verbal abuse. And we can't have that. And the other complaint apparently is Rudolph's classmates bully him. You know, all the other reindeer would not let him join in their reindeer games, that whole bit. That's now offensive. It's politically incorrect. And when you are growing up, one of the reasons why this story has such a broad appeal, we all go through times where we're learning our social skills, and we don't always fit in. We got bullied at school, occasionally got beat up, and you were on the outs. And the idea was to learn how to overcome that and adjust to it. And that was just life. And again, this idea coming out of the liberal ideology that we can get rid of things like bullying or verbal abuse just by re-engineering society. It sounds good in theory. It's never worked out. Human nature is human nature, and a lot of it is wired into our DNA. Margaret Mead's book, Coming of Age in Samoa, was an intellectual fraud. It wasn't written to find out what was really going on. It was written to support this agenda. That yes, if we take complete control of your life, you will be happy and free from angst. And in fact, the opposite seems to be happening. That one yesterday we were talking about where there was this student, art student at school, who was upset, and another student just gave her a quick hug and got written up. We are all of us unique individuals. We are the products of those gifts that we are born with, multiplied by our life experience. We are not peas in a pod, and we can't be managed. We can't be reprogrammed. At least not yet here. Now, as you know, I live out here in the Pacific Ocean, and over that away is a place called Rapa Nui, or as it's more popularly known, Easter Island. And the Rapa Nuians are very sensitive about the moai, those giant stone statues. They hold tremendous religious significance. And there's one in particular called the Hoa Hakaranai, and it was basically looted in 1868 by the British HMS Topaz and delivered to Queen Victoria, who a year later gifted it to the British Museum. Well, from the point of view of the people of Rapa Nui, it was an outright theft. Now, the Guardian tries to say it was taken without permission. Yeah, that's theft. And the Rapa Nuians want it brought back because it goes in a specific place on the island of religious significance, and so they want it back. Well, the British Museum doesn't want to give it back because that would be an admission that it was wrongfully taken in the first place. So they've hit with this bizarre idea that they're going to loan this statue back to Rapa Nui, which is now officially part of Chile. And that's, to me, that's like bizarre. How do you loan back to somebody something that you took without their permission? But if you really think about it, and don't get me wrong, I love museums. I love museums. Every time I have a layover in any city anywhere, I love to hit the museums, especially the natural history museums. And they got a good one in Denver, not to mention the LA County museums. But they do represent basically treasure houses of very often looted materials, and the British Museum is one of the best. In fact, the Rapa Nuians are describing it as a temple to colonial theft. There's still a big debate going on about the Elgin marbles that used to adorn the top of the Parthenon. They're not at the Parthenon anymore. They're at the British Museum. And, pardon me, Egypt wants a lot of their artifacts back. And I think in this day and age of high-resolution digital media and the internet, I don't think it's necessary to have all of these items collected together in one place. And they should really go back. All right. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over the break, I'm looking at the feed on Fox News, and not a mention about what happened in Syria today, or for that matter, Yemen, or any of the war zones. People like Reuters and Associated Press are covering it. Most of the coverage, though, is from the foreign press. But it's nonstop of the political infighting that's going on in Washington, D.C. And I'm sorry, that's not news to me. And along with things like Drag Queen Story Hour, and transgenderism, and going after Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, what kind of an image are we sending to the rest of the world? And I understand there are some important issues that are being decided in Washington, D.C., but there are more important things happening out in the rest of the world. And I guess it's ego or vanity, but they just want their camera time. And that the more they shout and scream at each other, and so now they're all going on about a pending federal lawsuit over details of the plea agreement. Trump is threatening to totally declassify the FISA documents. Is this any way to run a government? No, I don't think so. I really do not think so. Okay. Now, a little bit of good news for you science people. NASA today is announcing its first commercial partners for the return to the moon. Apparently, it is definitely on for real. and they're going to be looking at partnering with a lot of private companies who are going to try and find some way to commercialize the moon. There could be some interesting things there that could be mineable. I know that Russia has broached the possibility of partnering with NASA for an orbiting station, manned station around the moon, sort of like a mini ISS. But I'm glad it's happening. I do like to see NASA get revived and put back into the exploration business, because solving the problems to get these spaceships on the moon or in orbit, we're going to discover new technology that will be the foundation of new industries. That's where the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s came on out of, was Apollo. Before the Mercury space program, there was no such thing as personal computers, or even, for that matter, integrated circuits. Transistors had just become available. And I've grown up with technology, and sometimes I'll look at it, and it's amazing. And maybe it's because I saw what it used to be. And I can imagine probably young kids today, they take it for granted because it's the way the world has always been. But good for NASA, and, you know, keep on going. And again, congratulations to the flight crew of that Mars lander. And I imagine it's very, very exciting for them. And by the way, there are already all kinds of humorous memes circulating around, some of which we saw before for previous landers. Alrighty. Now, yesterday we were talking about how this Chinese scientist, Dr. He, had announced that identical twin girls that had been genetically modified to make them resistant to HIV and other diseases had been born earlier this month. And a lot of people said that this is absolutely wrong. And apparently this doctor did not have any, shall we say, official oversight. And China's Vice Minister of Science and Technology has condemned this research as unacceptable. And are probably, well, the Chinese government has ordered a halt to all work by the entire medical team that claimed to have helped Dr. He in his research. And apparently universities and police are also investigating. And I'm in agreement. This is such a dangerous thing. And it has the potential for misuse. And one of the reasons for my concern is how many times that we have seen new medical technologies, medications, they just mass marketed to the public, and they turn out to have serious problems. And the danger with gene editing is if the genes are able to escape and break wild, for example, epithelial cells, you can't get it back. Those DNA molecules are little tiny teensy things. It's going to be very hard to get them back. Now, over at Oxford University, they've had this study that has suggested a very clear link between the pregnancy test drug Primidose and severe birth defects in babies born to mothers who used that drug. And apparently, in the report that came from Sky News, a former employee at the drug manufacturers was actually told by their doctor not to use it while it was still being offered to the general public. Now, Bayer, which took over the manufacturer sharing, told Sky News, Bayer is aware of the ongoing Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review, which is a non-statement here. But apparently, there's a concern that some of these pregnancy tests, hormone pregnancy tests, actually cause genetic damage. And there's a video for this. And some of those poor babies, they're missing their hands, they're missing their feet, severe skull deformity. How can you even take the risk of doing that to a child? But it has happened before. Remember the thalidomide scandal. It's just out there pushing the product, pushing the product, pushing the product. Over at the Weather Channel, they're now saying it's been one of the most miserable starts to winter on record. Across the Northeast, Midwest, and Plains, it has been one of the coldest and snowiest starts to the winter season on record. By golly, the original Farmer's Almanac got it right again. Certainly better than the Weather Channel, which is very unreliable here. So they're also trying to blame the unseasonable cold over the poor retail performance for Black Friday. Just don't want to deal with that reality. People do not have that money here. Okay. They're still going on about Michael Cohen pleading guilty. They're really going to try and crank this up and say, he lied, presume that Trump is guilty. Anyway. Let's see. Yeah. Somebody sent me an email about that guy who was playing Grand Theft Auto online. You can't fix stupid here. More stories about what's going on in Israel and Syria. Fort Russ is calling it a blunder, a dramatic blunder. Israel is still insisting that Syria fired a missile into the Golan. And now they're back to just saying all hostile targets. So it may be that they didn't get the warplane. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this one. Sputnik Arabic is now claiming the Syrian air defense systems downed an Israeli jet for cruise missiles. Okay. I think somebody's got to get out there and get the wreckage photographed before we really know who's lying and who's telling the truth. Remember, truth is the first casualty in war, and everybody lies. Everybody lies about what's going on. Okay, now let's see. Pick up a few other things here. I already mentioned that CNN fired that commentator for criticizing Israel. And apparently, let's see, 16 U.S. postal workers accepted bribes to deliver cocaine in metro Atlanta. Neither rain nor snow nor gloom of night will stay these couriers, blah, 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 blah. For those of you dealing with health issues, apparently there is a trend where health insurers are no longer willing to pay ER costs because they are so high. And they're telling the story about this Brittany Cloyd of Frankfort, Kentucky, had to go to the ER. She had an Anthem Blue Cross PPO health insurance plan, thought she'd get charged for the copay. Instead, she got hit with a bill for $12,000. And apparently, according to a report in the Doctor-Patient Rights Project, this is becoming more and more common, that Anthem has instituted an organized policy of denial designed to make its subscribers, particularly those who are poor and reside in rural areas, too afraid to go to an ER for fear of receiving a bill. So there's another example. It's all driven by the money. They're not concerned about your health. They just want to maximize the amount of money they're getting from you. What a mercantile, greedy little nation we have become. So, okay. It just goes on. All right, so we're coming up on a quarter of the hour here, and once again, unfortunately, I ran out of talking points here. I'm going to have to talk slower, I think, in the future. But there was a lot going on. Apparently, Dershowitz is ripping Mueller for false statement prosecutions. And I hope Corsi goes ahead with his lawsuit. This thing was a farce right from the very, very beginning. And I'm glad that the Guardian got embarrassed with that news story where they claimed Manafort had met with Julian Assange. And it was such an easy thing to disprove. But it seems almost like the government and the corporate media are playing to that segment of the population which still has naive faith that they're being told the truth. And it is up to all of us, Rivero's Rangers, to start educating people around us the extent to which we're lied to. We're not lied to just a little. We're not lied to occasionally. We're lied to about absolutely everything. And it's all about selling us a product, selling us a new president, selling us a new policy, selling us a new war. And we have to become more and more skeptical. We have to stop being naive. That's probably the most important thing right now that we can all be doing. Everybody keeps calling on in and writing on, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I am alarmed by talk of violence and assassination. But right now, the most important thing that we can do, those of us who know what's really going on, have to gently start educating the other people around us. And you're going to meet people who don't want to know, because they don't want to have to face the choice of what are they going to do. They want to go through their lives thinking they're good little people, and but they're brave and courageous, and they would stand up for justice if there was any injustice around. But I'm not seeing any right now, so we'll just go on living our lives. But as I said to that caller earlier, I think that segment of the population is very much in decline. And I think as you start to talk to people, and don't overwhelm them. One of the biggest mistakes that truth activists can do is just try and throw so much at the person once they see that they're receptive. That's going to trigger off a defensive reflex, and they will shut down. Just one item at a time. I remember a while ago when this Russian hacking thing was the big deal. And somebody said, oh, wasn't it horrible? Russia was hacking the DNC, and what do you think of that? And all I replied was, it's the 2016 version of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And their eyes lit up. And they said, it's another lie. I said, of course it's another lie. And that is something that Americans have to wake up and deal with and just face. We live in an ocean of lies. We're the most lied to people on the face of the earth here. All right, a couple of news stories coming on here. Apparently, DHL is investing $300 million to quadruple the robots in their warehouses next year. And again, I cannot tell you how opposed I am to this. It is such short-sighted thinking that if ordinary people are unable to trade their labor for decent wages and salaries, they're not going to be buying products. DHL could wind up with a warehouse full of robots and nobody's buying or selling or shipping anything. It's very frustrating to see all this poor quality thinking that's out there here. All righty, let's see. President Trump is back ragging on the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve, unfortunately, is saying that, yes, there will probably be a rate hike next month, which is going to roil the markets again, although they did fairly well today. All right, we have a caller on the line. Fred in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, much. You mentioned just now FedRes, a foreign private corporation whose private stockholder families, many of whom are Wall Street, a Talmudic Shabbat Lubavitch gangster thugs, and the economy, according to the FedRes charter, is supposed to be a stable currency, a stable economy. But how can that be when all the FedRes chairmen come from Israel? And just as was demonstrated after Trump's inauguration, the first one up for a speech was a Shabbat Lubavitch rabbi going on about whatever he was going on about from his Talmud. And you said that our country has become egregiously greedy, words to that effect.
Yes.
My take my take, Mike, goes to Werner Sombart, who in 1911 authored a book.
Fred, I got to put you on hold. Don't hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, we're talking with Fred in Michigan. And Fred, you're absolutely right. Private central banking is not set up to serve the nation or its people. It is a private, for-profit, money-making system. It is a deliberate selling of the people into a permanent debt trap they can never escape from in order to basically enslave them. And that's what it is. For all this thing about freedom and liberty in this country, we are enslaved to that Federal Reserve.
Right. And since they violated their charter mandates for a stable economy, stable currency at all, they need to be terminated. We can easily establish a public central bank and simply switch the collateral, which is everyone's birth certificate, sweat equity, labor, private assets, everything attached to your Social Security number and all caps name. That's the collateral. Well, we can switch it to a public central bank owned by us.
Well, let me stop you here because we're almost out of time. Let me stop you here real quick. First of all, Congress has the authority to revoke the charter of the Federal Reserve anytime they want. They're never going to do it because the Federal Reserve is a very generous campaign contributor. The people who've got the power and the ability to affect the change, they don't want to change. It works for them. It keeps the money flowing to them. It keeps us under their control, and they like that. The only way we're going to be free of the Federal Reserve is if there is a major economic crash and the whole thing just gets wiped out. But you're absolutely right. A public bank that deals in a value-based currency, like the system this country was set up with, that's the only way you can have a stable currency and a stable monetary supply.
We just got to keep talking it up, man. Go to the churches, go to the student groups. That's what I'm going to be doing. And that's right there in the U.S. Constitution. No provision for a private central bank. Nothing but gold and silver coin. And yeah, we had silver certificates, gold certificates. We go back to that. And Mike, there should not be a codified mandate for Israel to get whatever they want whenever they deem it necessary for national security. And yet, that's what was mandated by U.S. Congress. And it's Title 42 U.S.C., Chapter 152, Subchapter 8, Section A. It's bizarre, man. Anything, including high tech.
Fred, I'm sorry to do this. I'm going to say goodbye because we've got one more call on the line that I'm going to try and get to. So, Rhonda in Missouri. Aloha, Rhonda. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was listening to your show a little bit earlier. You were talking about transgender.
Yes.
And briefly, I wanted to say I got a survey yesterday. It was hilarious. He called and he asked me what gender I identify with. I was like, are you serious right now? Well, to keep it brief, I assumed that he was a man on my part. But to keep it brief, at the end of the phone call, I had him interested in listening to RBN.
Oh, well, good sales job.
What are they doing? Right? But what are they doing? I mean, I was like, you called the right house. I mean, that's a hot button for Rhonda. I'll just tell you that right now. Transgenderism is a hot button. But yeah, you can turn it around on him, and then maybe they'll start getting some critical thinking skills, right?
Well,
okay. Well, thanks for
consummation
taking my
devoutly to be wished. Rhonda, I got to let you go. We're at the end of the show here. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. We've got to find all the people who took the blue pill, and we've got to open up their eyes here. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.